What is up, everybody? Josh Tapp here again, and welcome back to the Lucky Titan. Today, we are here with Jay Johnson. So stoked to have him here. Jay is the CEO of Behavioral Elements, and I wanted to bring him in specifically for his take on how to overcome these big roadblocks, these big barriers. And to kind of preface my first question for you, Jay, and first off, let's have you say what's up to everybody, and then we'll continue forward.
How you doing, everyone? Thanks for having me, Josh. Appreciate it.
No problem, man. This is going to be fun. So to preface this question, I want to talk about the rule of ones and threes. And people who've been listening to the show for any amount of time, they know that, these are the places you get stuck. $100,000, $200,000, maybe $1 million, $3 million. And it's hilarious to watch it from a third party perspective and be like, well, if you just did this, you could solve the problem. But 99% of the time, it's not tactical, it's mental, and it's behavioral changes that need to be changed. And so bringing in Jay on this, it's going to be fun to have your take on this, to really talk to us about your assessment and how you've been helping people to break that barrier. So let me ask you that. What is your framework?
So the Behavioral Elements is a program that we designed to help people. We kind of start with the fundamental premise of behavior as a choice, and how you choose to behave is ultimately going to drive your success and your failures. If you ever think about a team you were on that did not do so well, you could probably identify the behaviors that ultimately led to its demise. Whereas if you've been on a high performance team, you'll know that there's behaviors of trust, strong communication, and so on and so forth. So behavior is the output. We have these thoughts, we have these feelings, and somewhere in the middle of there, we make a decision. What we try to do is help people make space for that decision to choose to behave intelligently.
Yeah, and I love that. That's really the big problem that people are experiencing, especially in today's world. And we're not here to talk about coronavirus, but this is literally the state of the world outside of coronavirus and the things that have been happening. Is we're at a point where we always tie our success to external factors, when most of the time, as you're saying, it's an internal factor that's causing that issue. So for you, Jay, and you've been in business for what, 20 years now, 10 years now, something like that.
About 15, yeah.
15 years. Yeah, there you go. So you've experienced enough failures and successes to know that there are these plateaus even in your own company. So let's walk through a little bit of how you would help people to break those barriers, and how they could start by identifying where they're at.
Yeah. So, and our behavioral elements framework really kind of goes into an understanding. So we practice behavioral intelligence, which is the skills and abilities to accurately explain behaviors, predict behaviors, influence behaviors, and then control our own behaviors. So the behavioral elements program is really a guide to getting to understand of what makes you tick. What are those? Where do those thoughts and feelings that we have, where do they come from? And it's not a personality assessment. It's much more focused on core biological drives, which was really great research across anthropology, sociology, psychology, neuroscience, to kind of look at how humans have evolved. And they say that we have 4 different core drives: the drive to acquire, the drive to bond, the drive to learn, and the drive to defend. So if you look at human existence, we had to learn to defend ourselves and our resources and everything else from oncoming threats, or we had to learn to defend our bodies from, disease, sickness, or whatever else. We developed this sort of innate core biological drive to defend. Same thing with acquiring, right? We had to compete. We had to look for resources. We had to gain resources. We had to have goals. Those who were good at hunting, were the ones that would be able to feed the tribe and have the greatest opportunities for survival. Same with bonding, and also same with curiosity and learning. So our behavioral elements programs maps that, measures that inside of people, and then starts to look and say, why is it that you are either, maybe you know exactly, you have these thoughts, you say, I need to do this. If I do this, I'm going to break that 3 mark, or I'm going to break that 1 mark. But then you start to get this feeling inside of you, and your feeling is like, all right, I want to acquire more than 300,000 or 3 million. But you start going, but what if I fail? And that drive to defend kicks in. And then you get this curiosity drive kicking at the same time. And you're like, but I could maybe do this or that or the other thing. And you get excited about it. But then you go, but what if my team doesn't want to follow me? Or what if my family, doesn't like that I'm spending this time? these drives are all pulling at us at different times. Sometimes when they're in concert, very powerful motivation. Sometimes we can have thoughts and feelings that are completely dissonant, and it can cause paralysis for us to do what we already probably know that we need to do in order to go forward. And I think that's what you're speaking to when you're talking about that mental block.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And that's where I think so many people are getting stuck because we don't want to address it. So, and I want to ask you this question because in relation to, you talk about the four elements or the four behaviors. First off, can I have you cover that in a little bit more depth of what that framework is, how to identify that, and honestly, how to use it to overcome these barriers?
Yeah, sure. So each of these behaviors pull on us in different ways, right? So for example, I am a high fire as my primary element and air is my secondary. Fire is associated with the drive to acquire, air is associated with the drive for curiosity and learning. So ultimately, what you'll find is at any point in time, I am at my most happiest when I'm designing a new thing or I'm working on something new or creating or innovating in service to getting it to market quickly, to creating new opportunities for goal settings, for new sales, for new this. That's really where those things come down. Our assessment kind of gives us an idea of which drive or drives pull at us the most. So if I found myself in a job where I was doing detailed work, only focused on systems, no creativity, no opportunities to think outside the box, just push the button, I would be absolutely miserable. There's no way that I would succeed or thrive in that position. If I was put into a position where I wasn't able to, say, for example, collaborate with other people, I would find a lot of struggles there. So each of those drives pull on people in a different way. When we understand those, our assessment measures how those drives essentially interact inside of you, which has an impact on your emotions, your feeling, your motivation, your decision making, and so on and so forth, right? Humans are very complex. You put a piece of cake in front of a human and they can have thoughts about it that say, ooh, I want that cake, the drive to acquire. But I can also say, but I'm on a diet and I promised myself, the drive to defend, to protect ourselves. Say, but we're here with all of our friends, the drive to bond. And we look at those types of things and all of those decisions rationalize themselves in our brain. And then finally we say, I'm not going to take the cake, or I am going to take the cake. But that's a choice and it's driven by those thoughts and behaviors. We help people to understand where those thoughts and behaviors are coming from and then how to make better decisions with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, right? Is identifying how you're reacting to things. And I love that you talk about, the four elements. I mean, we look at any like personality assessment and they're separated into four quadrants. So we all kind of have a general understanding of it. But what I love about your model is it's almost scenario based. Like how frequently are you being a fire or being, a creative who's not organized?
Yeah, and we start with the premise of, so we really started with the premise. I'm certified in virtually every single personality assessment that's out there, including clinical ones. And at the end of the day, what I didn't like is that they were prescriptive. They said, Josh, this is how you are, and you should know that. But it doesn't tell you, Josh, you can actually choose to not behave like in the disc profile, a DI. You can actually choose to be more conscientious. You can choose to be more socially focused. Or if you're looking at the Myers-Briggs type of personality, it puts a juxtaposition between your thinking and your feeling. Well, guess what? Your brain chemistry, the limbic system and your prefrontal cortex are hardwired together. You're both. And sometimes you act emotionally and sometimes you act rationally. What we try to do is create the space for you to make the decision that's going to be a better behavioral outcome.
See, and that is so crucial, especially for someone like me. So I grew up in a family where my parents love personality assessments. I mean, they've done them all, right? And for all of us, it was almost like a running joke that I was the cleric, the fire, the whatever, right? Which automatically makes me a jerk, right? And but then as I've grown older and everything, I've seen that more, right? As I can make that decision. I can decide, you know what, I'm going to be more conscientious. I'm going to be more structured. I'm going to spend more time focusing on the individual instead of the social environment. And those sort of things have helped me to make those changes. But I love that you've put it graphically too, because it helps my brain to understand it. But for you guys, once you've identified that, what are kind of the key steps to making a behavioral change or a shift in your behavior?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And if so, I'm going to disclose something, and it's moderately entertaining, but it kind of gives you an idea of my compete drive, my drive to acquire, right? I was sitting, and so over the time of COVID, my nephew has started to learn how to play chess. He's 10 years old, taught him, and I play. And of course, I enjoy chess. So I beat him, I beat him, I beat him. I never let my nephew win. That's number one, probably a good indication of my drive to acquire, my fire drive, if you will. But I start teaching him, he's getting better, he's getting better, he's getting better. And all of a sudden, it wasn't all that long ago, while we were playing, I was distracted and I made a mistake, and he's seen it. And he moves his queen into a position, and I'm sitting there and I go, oh God, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose to my 10-year-old nephew. And like in my brain, I had this feeling of like, what if I just got up and accidentally bumped over the board? And I know your audience is probably thinking like, what a monster. No, I didn't do that. I stopped myself and I said, that's not right. I could teach him, he could feel really good about himself. And I activated my drive to bond over my drive to acquire. Thankfully, he screwed up and I ended up winning the chess game anyway, so all things were averted. But the whole concept there is recognition. That moment of feeling, being able to, like, a lot of times, if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody and you're heated and all of a sudden you say something and you're like, I'm going to regret that. Or you walk away from it and you get about 10 steps away and you're like, oh, I should have said this. That is a transitional space in our brain that allows us to kind of step back and say, here's a more rational, logical, thoughtful. This is all about the first step is really being aware of what are your triggers? What are those core biological triggers that we all have that affect us very differently? Once we're aware of them, then it's about creating some space. That can be a whole host of different tactics, everything from habit stacking to breathing to a lot of the ones that you might have heard, and then a whole host of other ones of tracking things like triggers or environmental stimuli and things like that that can give us the data that we need in order to really truly hone in and say, this is a better behavior for this situation.
I love that, because it's about self-awareness, like you're saying, but it's knowing that you're never too far gone, right? There's always something you can do in a situation. I love that example because I'm very much that same way. But what's interesting, and I want to get your take on this, especially as somebody who studied this, and we also both have that fire, right? Have you found that as a competitive person, if it's not something you're even good at, you just don't want to do it?
There are some things. So it's weird because I'll have a little bit of both back and forth, right? Like I have never been, I'm not a musically inclined person. Musical intelligence was certainly not my forte. But during COVID, I bought just a keyboard, right? Like not a grand piano, but I bought a keyboard and I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. And I played hockey. I was a mixed martial artist. I was a competitive debater, right? Uh, all of these super high, impact, aggressive, long time ago. Obviously, I haven't done that in quite some time. But now I'm going to try to learn piano. And as I'm hacking away at these keys, like literally like a monster, and I'm just wailing away at them, it was one of those things where I knew I wasn't particularly good at it. I tried one of my behavioral strategies, which was 5 minutes a day. That's all I was going to do is 5 minutes a day, every day. I would get on that piano and I'd start playing. And all of a sudden it got a little smoother. It got a little smoother. It got a little smoother. Something like that, where I have sort of a drive to do it. And my drive to do it was self-discovery. So my curiosity drive, but also somebody told me that I couldn't. They're like, you're never going to be able to do this. So my competition drive kicked in hardcore to be like, I will show you that I will be able to do this. I can now successfully play for Elise, and that's about it. That's the only thing that I practice 5 minutes a day, but I can play it, and it's not great. It's certainly not high. I'm not ready for Carnegie Hall, but I can play it, and it's moderately okay. there is other instances where I look at something and I'd be like, that makes literally no damn sense to me. And I have zero interest in even trying to acquire that skill, that knowledge, that domain, or anything else. So I would say that it can be yes and no on that question.
It depends if somebody challenges you, right?
Oh yeah, that is, gamification, healthy competitions. We have an entire healthy competitions program to really kind of help fires access that drive, and people that are not fires maybe even can get into that or kind of tap into their own. We all have all four drives. It's just how much does each of them tug at us, right? So
Right.
getting some of my teammates that are very high in water, very high in bond, oftentimes that has a trade-off. They may not have as much of a competitive drive. So instituting little games or things like that kind of gets them to access that drive. Once you can realize where they're at, you start to be able to access them a little bit more. But that's really motivation, right? Like, you don't know what it is, it's too hard. It's that bell curve of, satisfaction and challenge, and it's got to be right down that middle pipeline. Right up until somebody tells me that I can't do it. And then I'm going to do everything in my power to do it. Much to my
High
chagrin.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. So, and I love that because your entire program, so the behavioral elements program, is built around playing to the strengths of each of the different personalities. And when you're coming into a company, and I'm just going to give you a scenario here because this is kind of our typical listener, right? You've got maybe 5 to 10 employees total across all of your quote unquote departments. It's basically 5 bootstrappers working together to build a company.
Yep.
And you're stuck at $1 million. What would be the absolute first behavioral change that would need to happen in that company?
So it's going to depend on the company, but the first thing that I would want to do is kind of find out why. Why do you want to go above this? What's your purpose to go above this? And if they start telling me things like, oh, well, we want to capture more market share, we want to be competitive against blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, now I know I'm working with the drive to acquire. If they say, well, we need to be able to sustain our family and sustain this or sustain our employees, and now you're telling me it's a different drive. So number one is I'm going to find what is your actual personal drive, because that is essentially going to make up your purpose, your why statement. If your why statement is misaligned, in many cases it is, from a cultural standpoint, from a team standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, that's probably one of the places that I'm going to diagnose that you have an issue. Then we'll look at your processes and say, all right, how's your sales process? If you want to make more money, that's a very simple proposition. Bring it. If you want more money, more wealth, bring in more money than you spend. Are you bringing in enough? Are you protecting your assets enough? Acquiring, defending. Are you distributing it enough that you're creating an environment for people to essentially foster new innovation or new opportunities? Are you stagnant on ideas? Are you stagnant in team capacity? Looking at those elements is really going to give me the idea to say, okay, now let's start looking at the behaviors that you can do to overcome that barrier, right? Any barrier is overcomable. It's a lot of times you look and you see there's 10,000 bricks right there in the way. Well, guess what? If you pick up 2 bricks at a time, carry them across the street, and you do that over the course of 20 days for 8 hours, those 10,000 bricks disappear. It may take you a little time, and small behavior, micro behaviors may get you there, but sometimes you got to be able to see the thing and say, there is something on the other side. I just need the micro behaviors that are going to help me to get over there. That's usually where we start.
And I love that because that's so digestible as the entrepreneur, right? We feel like we're so busy. It's like this rite of passage in entrepreneurship. Oh, I work 14-hour days. I personally, my goal is to never have to work more than 8 in a day. Right. We're doing our best to cut it down to where I'm working 20 hours a week. But with that kind of being said, right, it's when you give me something to do that says, oh, it's going to be 2 hours of your time per day, it better yield something amazing or I'm not going to stick to it, right?
Yep.
If you're saying, hey, 5 minutes a day, I love that. Those are the kind of habits for me. Like I got out of the habit of working out for a couple of years and we do it here or there, what have you. But then finally I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a 10-minute workout every day, no matter what, because there's literally no excuse to not do that. Even if I roll around on the ground and pretend I'm working out, I'm like doing something better, right? And that kicked the the desire on in my head to want to get back into it more. And so I have, and that's why I love the chunking or whatever they call it, right? It's the 5-minute incremental
Yep.
changes. I love that. Well,
You know, and with that, a great strategy for that. So say you launch that 10 minutes a day, you get in there, you get that mentality, you're doing it. Okay, well, what else do you want to accomplish? The next 10 minutes are going to be on meditation. Okay, the next 10 minutes are going to be on writing, or the next 5 minutes, or whatever it is. And you can stack those pro-positive, pro-consequence behaviors on top of each other, that once you start getting into a routine and knowing, why is it that you want to do this? Are you doing it for health? Are you doing it for physical appearance? Are you doing it for family? Are you doing it for what is the purpose of this? That's really going to help you kind of stay on that path and keep going, even when you don't feel motivated to do so.
love that. Well, and we have covered a lot of different topics here, but I want to pause here for a second and say, where can people gain access to your program? Because it is available.
Yeah, so behavioralelements.com, very simple. So just behavioralelements.com. You'll find a couple of different tools there. We have a quick free assessment. You can take it. It'll tell you what your primary drive is. But we also have a full assessment, and we've priced it very, very accessible, because one of the things that we hated was, you want to take an actual personality assessment. They can charge you up to $175 per assessment. We made this accessible to everyone. So we made it $30. You can take the assessment. It'll tell you where you measure up in your 4 core drives. That is going to give you a 15-page packet that'll help you to understand kind of your decision making, your influence, your communication. We also have planners, behavioral planners that align with your different elements. We also offer coaching, workshop, and training and keynote opportunities to really kind of cement this within your team. So behavioralelements.com is where I'd send you.
Awesome. So make sure you go check that out, everybody. Behavioralelements.com. We will also add a link in the description, as well as somewhere around the video if you're watching this on video. And I want to ask you, Jay, one final question just to wrap this up. So if you could give one final parting piece of guidance to our audience, what would that be?
Go internal. That is going to be where you find your success and failure. The external factors, the environment, COVID, and everything else becomes a very convenient excuse. And I've been there. I was a solopreneur to start. I have business partners now. Went from having, myself, and I, to having a team of 12, and to now having behavioral guides in 12 different countries. So I know what it is to have that struggle. And I'll tell you, anytime that I found a challenge, it was usually because my behaviors were not the behaviors that were going to lead to the positive outcomes. And my behaviors are my choice, no one else's. The environment can flex, the external can flex, but at the end of the day, there's one thing that I have control over, and that's me. So start internal. Making those internal behavioral modifications, you will find the success comes from the external. And that would be the last thing I'd say.